Saudi Arabia started a game against Russia and on the side of the United States of America after Donald Trump's visit to Riyadh. The Organization of the Petroleum Exporting Countries plus cartel has been sharply increasing oil production for the third month in a row, which of course affects its price on the global market. In particular, the ministers of the Organization of the Petroleum Exporting Countries plus countries at a meeting on Saturday, the 31st of May, agreed on a decision to further increase oil production by 411,000 barrels per day starting in June. But they did the same thing in the previous 2 months as well. Of course, this will affect oil prices, but here, as they say, don't rush to praise Saudi Arabia too much. Because it was partly Saudi Arabia itself that led to the price increase that happened under Joseph Biden, the increase in oil prices. My name is Alexei Pichy. Today is June 1st. Let's figure out together the so-called oil topic. How the increase in oil production by the Persian Gulf countries affects its prices and how this will impact the Russian economy. Before we begin, I ask you to subscribe to this channel, like this episode, and leave your comment. Also subscribe to the Pichy News Telegram channel. The link to it is in the description of this video. So, the ministers of the Organization of the Petroleum Exporting Countries plus countries agreed yesterday to additionally increase oil production by 411,000 barrels per day starting in June. This is stated in the organization's press release. And I would like to note here that a similar increase in Organization of the Petroleum Exporting Countries plus supplies took place in May and is planned for June. Thus, over 3 months, the cartel, which unites 36 of the largest oil-producing countries, will add 1.2 million barrels of new daily supplies to the market. This is the maximum since 2020, when Organization of the Petroleum Exporting Countries Plus lifted the strict restrictions that were introduced during the pandemic. At the Organization of the Petroleum Exporting Countries Plus meeting, a disagreement arose between two key members of this organization, Saudi Arabia and Russia. According to sources, the Russian delegation opposed increasing production, which could further lower oil prices and threaten the Kremlin with budget problems. But representatives of Saudi Arabia still lobbied for a decision to increase oil production, since they want to fulfill the request of the Donald Trump administration, which publicly demanded lower oil prices. In order to punish Russia in this way and take away the revenues it spends on the war against Ukraine. As analysts state, it is possible that the global oil market is on the verge of a new price war. This already happened in 2020 when Russia, at the beginning of the pandemic, refused to cut production to balance the market and, slamming the door, left the Organization of the Petroleum Exporting Countries Plus Alliance. Šokirovanie predstaviteľi Saudovskej Arábie v odvet objavili bezprecedentne skýtky na svoju nefty, rezko povisili proizvodstvo i obrušili neftianie kotírovky. At first it was $5 to $10 per barrel, and then it even went negative when a barrel cost less than zero. That is, there was a negative price. A month after this whole situation, the Kremlin was forced to capitulate. Russia returned to Organization of the Petroleum Exporting Countries Plus and, as part of the New Deal, was forced to cut production more than anyone else. That is, in this way, Saudi Arabia then harshly punished Russia for trying to stand out and go against the cartel. It took only a month for Russia to crawl back to Organization of the Petroleum Exporting Countries Plus and said, okay, but the Saudis then said, it would be good if you return to Organization of the Petroleum Exporting Countries Plus, but you Russians must cut production the most. We'll also reduce, but less than you. We'll sell a bit more, we'll earn a bit more, and you are being punished for what you did. According to the plan of Saudovskaya Aravia, Organization of the Petroleum Exporting Countries Plus should increase production by 2.2 million barrels per day. Initially, if Riyadh planned to stretch this process of increasing production until the end of 2026, now Saudovskaya Aravia insists that new supplies should hit the market already this year. As a result of all this, the price of oil could fall to $50 per barrel. Analysts are already forecasting this. Accordingly, Russian oil is already being sold at a discount of at least $10 compared to the benchmark. And that means its prices could drop to the range of $40 to $50. That is, most likely it will be $40 per barrel. And here it's important to note that the government of the Russian Federation initially based the budget on an average Urals price of almost $70 per barrel. But already in the spring, When Donald Trump started the tariff wars and Saudi Arabia decided to turn the taps on at the oil fields, it became clear that the forecast was absolutely unattainable. No price of $70 for Russian oil is expected at all. And then in March, the price of Urals dropped by more than 60%. And as of the end of April, the price of Urals oil is $54. And in May, it barely reached $50 per barrel. In response, the Ministry of Finance and the Ministry of Economic Development of Russia recalculated the budget parameters based on oil at $56. According to the new plan, oil and gas revenues will amount to 8.3 trillion rubles instead of almost 11 trillion, and the budget deficit will be 3 times higher than the initial estimates. Russia initially estimated a deficit of 1.2 trillion rubles, but it has now been calculated at 8.3 trillion rubles, nearly 4 times higher. And Saudi Arabia needs oil at $90 in order to balance its budget. And it would seem, why then is Saudi Arabia taking such a risk? Why would they reduce prices so drastically if they require the price to be at 90? Even Russians need less than that. But Riyadh can lower this threshold by pumping more and accordingly earning from the volumes. The Saudis can afford this. They have already pulled off a similar situation more than once. But, in this situation, you shouldn't rush to praise the organization of the petroleum exporting countries plus cartel, because the high oil prices at which Russia was making huge money are, after all, they're doing organization of the petroleum exporting countries. Plus, on the contrary, for years has been cutting production quotas, trying to reach a price of $100 per barrel. So the whole idea of the cartel was to get the price to jump up to $100 per barrel of oil, but that didn't work out. Shale oil production, primarily in the United States of America, was actively filling the gaps that appeared after organization of the petroleum exporting countries plus reduced its output. But it's no coincidence that last year the United States of America set a historic record for shale oil production. Now, Saudi Arabia finally admits that they won't see $100 per barrel, and they've adopted a strategy of increasing production to lower prices and drive that very shale oil out of the market. They do this from time to time because their production costs are just pennies, unlike the shale producers in some other countries. When prices drop sharply, shale oil production becomes absolutely unprofitable and is forced to stop. As a result, for April, May, June, and July, the production increase will amount to 1.4 million barrels per day, which is 4 times less than what they once reduced. But this still allows for a nice price drop. So in fact, yes, we see an increase in production. We see that this could crash oil prices for Russia. But we need to remember that if we take the starting point, they had cut much more back then, which led to a significant increase in prices. When was Putin able to profit from this, Ukraine? This story is encouraging as Russia is greatly impacted by the decline in prices. And the oil and gas revenues of the Russian Federation's budget are decreasing, and Russian oil companies will be close to zero in profit or even operating at a loss. But here, in conclusion, I want to add that the duration of the price drop is more important than the depth of the drop. Let me explain what I mean. That is, for example, keeping the price at $60 per barrel for 2 years is much better than keeping it at $50 for half a year. And then a sharp jump upward. So it's very important here that this dynamic is maintained, that organization of the petroleum exporting countries plus keeps increasing oil production constantly. And we saw the curve on the price drop chart so that it would go down steadily and consistently over a long period of time. If it's just a short-term spike of such a price drop, then the effect will be less. Well, friends, I'll leave it at that for now. Share your opinions and conclusions in the comments below this episode, subscribe to the channel, hit the bell, and don't forget to leave a like.